They called it Golden Oaks Park, an idyllic subdivision of neat lawns, broad-leafed maple trees, and sparkling ranch-style houses that stretched along gently curving roads. When the development first opened its gates, it promised a friendly, neighborly lifestyle, complete with a clubhouse, tennis courts, and a seemingly well-organized HOA. Residents dreamed of blossoming gardens in spring, potluck barbecues in summer, and block parties that brought everyone together in the spirit of small-town warmth. Over time, however, the HOA's leadership changed hands, and certain individuals found their way into the board who were less about community cooperation and more about personal power. The newly minted secretary was a middle-aged woman named Priscilla Barnwell, but everyone, behind her back, called her Karen. She was known for her narrow-lipped scowl and her intense belief that rules existed to be rigidly enforced, no matter how trivial. Karen was the kind of person who marched around the neighborhood, arms folded tightly across her chest, phone camera at the ready to document any alleged infractions, garden gnomes that were too tacky, mailbox flags that were too large, her fences an inch too tall. To be fair, Karen had moved to Golden Oaks Park full of idealism. She fantasized about a neat, harmonious neighborhood where nothing was ever out of place. But her dream quickly turned into a crusade against anything she personally deemed unacceptable. Initially, people simply rolled their eyes at her. The mild exasperation turned to true dread when she secured a seat on the HOA board. Suddenly, Karen gained the authority, however small in the grand scheme of life, to impose fines or official warnings for what she labeled non-compliant behavior. In many suburban communities, the unwritten rule is to keep the peace, wave politely, share a few pleasantries, and avoid conflict by maintaining a cordial facade. For a while, the residents of Golden Oaks Park tried exactly that. They bit their tongues as Karen demanded changes in shrub placements, dog leash lengths, or how holiday lights needed to be turned off by 9 p.m. None of them wanted to spark her anger or find themselves in her crosshairs. But in her second year of office, Karen's ambition soared beyond the typical petty enforcement. She had a knack for sowing division, recruiting a small but dedicated group of followers who believed in imposing strict standards. Together, they set up monthly inspections where they would roam the neighborhood, note every blade of grass growing out of line, and submit these observations as formal complaints to the HOA. Older residents, especially those who couldn't keep up with a rigorous maintenance schedule, soon became their prime targets. A few families with limited income or physical limitations found themselves receiving repetitive notices of violation. Karen's single-minded dedication to order made life stressful. Carefully nurtured gardens that had been lovingly cultivated for years suddenly had to conform to her aesthetic demands. Anything unique, be it wind chimes, a bench near the mailbox, or a modest front porch statue, came under attack for clashing with the community's uniform appearance. Soon enough, the tension in Golden Oaks Park hit a breaking point. Neighbors began to quietly discuss how to push back against Karen's overreach. It was increasingly clear that something would have to give. Long before the infamous Walker incident, there had been minor conflicts that foreshadowed Karen's meddlesome nature. When the Tulson family painted their front door lavender to support their grandmother's cancer awareness campaign, Karen demanded it be repainted a community-approved neutral. The Tulsons pleaded their case, and many neighbors empathized. Lavender was hardly an eyesore, and it carried personal meaning. Karen wouldn't hear it. Armed with the HOA guidelines, she insisted that any deviation from the approved color palette would result in a fine. Tragically for the Tulsons, enough board members sided with Karen, leading to a formal notice. Rather than pay the ever-accruing fines, the Tulsons gave in, returning the door to the standard beige. Their grandmother's disappointed tears did not move Karen in the slightest. Rules are rules, she declared, her face set in grim satisfaction. Next door to the Tulsons lived Mr. and Mrs. Caulfield, both in their 70s, whose adult children visited regularly to help with yard work. One hot afternoon, a small group of grandkids set up a lemonade stand on the driveway to raise money for the local library. Within an hour, Karen and her minions marched down the sidewalk, a clipboard in hand, citing a ban on unregulated commerce on private property. The children were forced to close shop. It was a neighborhood tradition for kids to do that sort of thing, but evidently, traditions meant nothing to Karen if they weren't spelled out in the official bylaws. Events like these chipped away at everyone's good humor. Where once Golden Oaks Park had exuded warmth, it started to feel like an open-air prison patrolled by an overzealous warden. Fewer neighbors were interested in weekend barbecues, and even the monthly social gatherings at the clubhouse dwindled in attendance. Karen, ironically, seemed to enjoy the newfound quiet. In her mind, controlling these neighborhood disruptions was an accomplishment. She believed the rules were making Golden Oaks Park safe and orderly. Others might have used words like stifling, oppressive, and joyless, but Karen proudly carried on. For a while, the official HOA president was a gentle, soft-spoken retiree named Howard Mitchell. He was aware of Karen's unpopular decisions but found it difficult to stand up to her. She was, after all, the one who meticulously produced the official reports and updated the community website. She rarely acted illegally, just unethically, at times. Howard had a sincere desire to see Golden Oaks Park flourish, and he believed in compromise. But whenever he tried to moderate Karen's policies, she waved the bylaws in front of him, claiming that, as secretary, it was her duty to enforce them. Backed into a corner, Howard felt powerless. Those braver neighbors who attempted to challenge Karen on the finer points of the rules found themselves stonewalled or threatened with formal proceedings. She had the ear of just enough board members to carry votes. And most neighbors, not wanting to endure personal conflict or, worse, petty retaliation, found it easier to let matters lie. Eventually, a few of the more community-minded residents formed an unofficial group they half-jokingly called the Reclamation Crew. They gathered for coffee, shared stories of Karen's overreach, and tried to figure out legal or moral ways to push back. They pored over the bylaws themselves, searching for loopholes, or for ways to call a special meeting to challenge Karen's seat on the board. They even tried to rally behind certain neighborly acts, such as beautification projects that would be allowed by even the strictest reading of the HOA rules. Though they were resolute, they were also cautious. Karen was not above personal vendettas. She had proven time and again how far she would go to demonstrate her authority. Every month, the reclamation crew decided to hold off direct confrontation, hoping to avoid a feud that might make life even more miserable for them. Little did they know, Karen was about to do something that would cross a line, something so unforgivable that the entire neighborhood would unite against her. At the far end of Magnolia Lane, in a modest single-story house near a small pond, lived an 80-year-old widow named Martha Henderson. Martha was a gentle soul who loved feeding the ducks at dawn, reading romance novels, and offering homemade cookies to passers-by. Her late husband, Jim, had been a beloved fixture in the neighborhood. The two of them used to host jam sessions on the porch, Jim strumming the guitar while Martha sang old country ballads. After Jim's passing, Martha stayed put, determined to keep her independence. She relied on a walker, one of those with a padded seat and an attached basket. Throughout Golden Oaks Park, neighbors knew Martha as a kind presence who offered a smile, a wave, and often an invitation to sit on her front porch for lemonade. She was physically frail but mentally sharp as a tack. She had witnessed the changes in the HOA leadership over the years and quietly disapproved of Karen's approach. But Martha, always gracious, never confronted Karen publicly. She simply did her best to follow all rules, respectful and mindful of not stirring up trouble. That said, Martha had trouble carrying items from her car to her home. The walker's basket became essential for hauling groceries, prescription medications, reading glasses, anything she might need from day to day. Once in a while, she left her walker parked near the entrance to the clubhouse while attending a senior's mixer or crocheting circle. Others respected her space and never tampered with the walker, as it was obviously there to support her mobility. Karen had a personal obsession with clutter. In her mind, anything placed in community areas had to be streamlined, or else it was an eyesore. She particularly disliked seeing walkers, canes, or wheelchairs set up outside the clubhouse door. She felt it ruined the facade and made the place look like a nursing home. She had once proposed a measure requiring residents to leave mobility aids in their cars or hidden from view, but fortunately, Howard Mitchell had argued vigorously against it. Mobility aids aren't optional, he'd said, pushing back with an uncharacteristic firmness. Karen, for once, had been outvoted on the board, but the defeat only fueled her resentments. On more than one occasion, Karen had been overheard by passers-by complaining about the mess of personal items in walker baskets. They leave newspapers, tissues, or medication bottles just lying around, she'd hiss. It was as though the sight of normal, everyday objects offended her sense of decorum. Even so, people were used to Karen's gripes and mostly rolled their eyes. They never imagined she would go so far as to physically interfere with someone's property. One muggy summer afternoon, Martha had ventured to the clubhouse for a seniors crocheting meetup, a small group that gathered once a week to share patterns and tea. It was a leisurely event for retirees who enjoyed conversation and a bit of needlework. Martha's hands weren't as nimble as they used to be, but she got a great deal of pleasure from crocheting baby blankets to donate to local hospitals. She parked her walker just outside the double doors, in a shaded nook that she always used. Inside the basket, she had her ball of yarn, a bottle of water, tissues, her reading glasses, and a small zippered pouch containing her prescription medications. Usually, she brought the pouch inside, but in her hurry that day, she left it in the basket. That choice would have lasting ramifications. Karen happened to be at the clubhouse that afternoon, updating some bulletin board notices and reorganizing the HOA's pamphlets. She spotted Martha's walker almost immediately. The basket was partly visible, containing items that Karen deemed a visual nuisance. In Karen's mind, it was also a violation of some unwritten rule. Nobody had specifically said you couldn't place personal belongings in a walker basket near the entrance, but she believed it encouraged clutter. Scanning the surroundings to see if anyone was watching, Karen marched over to the walker. She peered into the basket, wrinkling her nose as she spotted what she considered junk. In one fluid motion, she unhooked the plastic basket from the walker's frame, walked it over to a nearby trash bin, and dumped the contents inside: prescription bottles, yarn, tissues, reading glasses, everything. Then, she fastened the now empty basket back onto the walker, dusted her hands, and stomped away, feeling a surge of self-righteous satisfaction. In her world, she had just tidied up. She never paused to consider that these items belonged to someone who needed them. She never imagined the consequences of tossing prescription medications, or how humiliating and infuriating it would be for Martha to discover the violation of her property. When Martha emerged from the crocheting group, smiling and chatting with her friends, she immediately noticed something was off. The basket, which was usually weighed down with her belongings, was suspiciously empty. A cold sense of dread gnawed at her. She shuffled closer and gasped. The yarn she needed for her project, gone. Her reading glasses, gone. Most alarming of all were her prescription bottles, two vital medications she couldn't skip without risking complications. Her crocheting group huddled around her. Some speculated that perhaps a good Samaritan had moved her belongings. Others feared theft, though such a crime was unheard of in the typically tranquil neighborhood. They searched high and low, opening nearby cabinets, scanning the clubhouse restrooms, and even peeking outside near the planters, but to no avail. Frantic, Martha approached the front desk, tears welling in her eyes. One of the staff members on duty, Elena, helped check the trash bins around the clubhouse. It took a few tense minutes of rummaging, but sure enough, they found Martha's belongings tossed into a tall bin near the side exit. Only now they were soaked in coffee grounds and old wrappers. The prescription bottles were sticky, covered in what looked like leftover soda. Martha's heart sank. Who would do such a callous thing? Her crocheting friends tried to comfort her, anger simmering in their voices. Martha, usually composed, felt violated and afraid. She needed her medications safe and secure, not tossed like garbage. This was more than a mere inconvenience. Someone had invaded her personal space, disrespected her property, and jeopardized her health. News of the incident traveled quickly. One of Martha's crocheting companions, Louise, confronted Karen in the lobby soon afterward. "Did you see anyone messing with a walker near the door?" she asked, eyeing Karen suspiciously. Karen shrugged dramatically, her mouth forming a pout. "I only tidied up some clutter," she replied, as if that were justification enough. "It was unsightly, and I assumed it was abandoned." Louise's eyes narrowed. "So you dumped it all in the trash? Including prescription meds? That's not just someone's property. That's crucial medication for an elderly neighbor." Karen bristled. She should know better than to leave personal items lying around in a public area. If you ask me, she's lucky it wasn't confiscated by security. This is precisely why we have rules. Elena, the staff member, overheard this exchange and immediately felt compelled to report Karen's admission to the HOA board. Such brazen disregard for a resident's well-being was appalling. Karen tried to defend herself, but the damage was done. A wave of disbelief and outrage rippled through the community. Rumors flew that Karen had attacked a helpless senior, and while she insisted she was only enforcing standards, neighbors were far less sympathetic. Martha's adult children, who lived out of state, were horrified to learn of the incident. They called the HOA office, demanding an explanation and hinting at potential legal action if their mother was harassed further. Howard Mitchell, the president, felt the sting of shame. He had personally promised to protect the community's older residents, and now a board member had blatantly violated that trust. He called an emergency meeting of the HOA to discuss possible disciplinary action against Karen. She marched into the meeting defiant, holding her thick binder of bylaws and pointing to a line that said the HOA could remove or dispose of any personal property left unattended in community spaces. Her interpretation was that she had done nothing wrong. But Howard, for once, had enough. "This is an abuse of that rule," he said, voice trembling with anger. "It's meant to address abandoned bicycles or items that block entrances, not medical equipment in use by a senior who was attending a sanctioned event. You had no authority to dump personal belongings, let alone prescription medications, into the trash." Several other board members, previously intimidated by Karen, found their voices that night. They condemned her actions as heartless and reckless. She tried to argue back, but the tide had turned. For the first time, she was truly on the defensive. Meanwhile, Martha's neighbors rallied around her. They dropped by her house bearing flowers and fresh crocheting supplies. Some offered to pick up her prescriptions for her. Others helped reinforce the walker's basket so it was more secure. Over and over, Martha thanked them tearfully, humbled and grateful for their kindness. The reclamation crew, that unofficial alliance of neighbors who sought to reclaim Golden Oaks Park from Karen's oppressive rules, had never felt so galvanized. If Karen's petty citations and intimidation tactics had been the slow drip of poison to community morale, this incident was the final drop that overflowed the glass. They recognized that Karen's action wasn't just a personal attack on Martha, but a symbol of disregard for anyone who didn't fit the mold of youthful, able-bodied perfection Karen seemed to idolize. At their next gathering, the reclamation crew discussed a creative solution. Frank, a retired engineer, had an idea. What if we design lockable compartments for walkers? Something discreet yet sturdy, so seniors can keep their meds and valuables safe. The group loved it. They realized that even if Karen was disciplined, the underlying problem of respecting seniors' personal property remained. They wanted to ensure no one else could tamper with the contents of a walker basket. And so, the seeds of a neighborhood-wide project were sown. Frank sketched a prototype on a whiteboard, a lightweight metal box that could be attached to a walker's frame. The box would have an integrated lock that only the owner could open. It wouldn't be too large or obtrusive, but large enough to hold a few essential items like medicine bottles, glasses, keys, and a wallet. "We can paint it neutral colors, so it doesn't draw negative attention," Frank said with a grin, aware that even a design solution might set off Karen if she found it too gaudy. The next step was rallying volunteers and acquiring materials. That's where members of the reclamation crew reached out to neighbors who had relevant skills, mechanics, hobbyists, people good at sewing or painting. Even some teens volunteered, eager to help older folks maintain their independence. The energy was palpable. Rather than letting Karen's negativity drag them down, they channeled their collective frustration into something positive. They started with Martha's walker, of course. Since she'd been the target of Karen's intrusion, the group wanted to restore her sense of security. Frank spent a few evenings cutting and welding small metal panels in his garage. Once assembled, he and another neighbor, Karenza, ironically, named Karenza, but going by Ruin to avoid confusion with the infamous Karen, painted it an understated gray. Carefully, they installed the lockable compartment on Martha's walker, explaining how to open and close it. "You can keep your medication in here, safe from prying hands," Frank said gently. "We'll even get you a spare key in case you lose one." Martha was overcome with gratitude. "I don't deserve this," she whispered, wiping away tears. "But I'm so touched that you'd go to all this effort." The volunteers assured her she was definitely worth the effort. Their respect for her and other seniors in the neighborhood was unwavering. Once Martha started using her new lockable compartment, word spread like wildfire. Other seniors, even some in neighboring communities, wanted similar modifications. It was a brilliant idea, simple, practical, and beneficial. The local newspaper got wind of the story and sent a reporter to interview Martha and Frank. The headline read, "Community comes together to protect seniors' personal items." A small photo featured Martha holding her walker proudly, her face alight with hope. This newfound attention put Karen under additional scrutiny. Her infamous role in the incident became public knowledge, and she was less than pleased to see the press praising a project that arose out of her own wrongdoing. Still, Karen had never been one to express remorse. She doubled down on her stance that personal property should not clutter public spaces, but she now had fewer allies. Many board members distanced themselves from her, not wanting to be associated with her harshness. A special HOA meeting was called to vote on endorsing the volunteer-led Lockable Basket Initiative. Howard Mitchell gave an impassioned speech. "We must recognize that our older residents deserve dignity and safety. Rather than punishing them for needing to keep personal items close, we should applaud solutions that uphold our sense of community." To everyone's amazement, even some of Karen's old supporters agreed that this was a positive measure. How could one argue against a design that protected seniors from theft or tampering? Karen tried to raise her old arguments, pointing to aesthetic concerns and the potential cost of installation. However, volunteers had already proven they could construct these compartments at a minimal cost, often with donated materials. "There's no expense to the HOA," Frank explained, "and they can be painted to match the walker, so there's no visual disruption." Backed into a corner, Karen cast the lone dissenting vote. The measure passed overwhelmingly. Officially, the HOA pledged support for the project, meaning they would share information about it in newsletters, connect volunteers with seniors who wanted help, and even consider partial reimbursements for materials if necessary. More significantly, the board publicly censured Karen for her action against Martha. Her seat was safe for now. Removing an officer required a more complex process, but her reputation was left in tatters. The Lockable Compartment Initiative accomplished more than just safeguarding personal items. It fostered a renewed empathy in Golden Oaks Park. Those who previously felt isolated by Karen's oppressive approach realized they had the power to come together and enact positive change. Neighbors who rarely spoke to each other now collaborated on painting days or installation sessions. Younger couples taught older folks how to manage new locks, while seniors shared wisdom about crocheting, baking, or gardening. Martha's crocheting group grew in attendance, with new faces drawn by the story of how a simple sense of community overcame an act of cruelty. She started crocheting small pouches that fit inside the new compartments to keep medication bottles or keys from rattling around. The pouches, adorned with cheerful patterns, became a symbol of resilience. Karen found herself increasingly isolated. She still walked the neighborhood, notepad in hand, but the usual deference or fear she relied on was replaced by sidelong glances and the occasional pointed stare. She tried to issue more citations, but the board insisted on reviewing them thoroughly before imposing fines. Many were dismissed as overzealous or trivial. Her power waned, and she felt a cold sense of anger. Some rumored that Karen's personal life was less than perfect, that she had moved to Golden Oaks Park after a difficult divorce, seeking control in an environment where she could impose order. She had lost friends in her previous neighborhood, too, due to similarly invasive behavior. Though few pitied her, some neighbors admitted that her tyranny might stem from deeper personal struggles. Even so, her refusal to show remorse for dumping Martha's belongings made forgiveness hard to come by. Meanwhile, a group of senior residents formed their own subcommittee to voice their concerns more actively. They recognized that they had too often been overlooked or pushed aside by Karen's enforcement tactics. Now, they had an opportunity to shape HOA policies in ways that benefited them, like ensuring accessibility to common areas or guaranteeing that caretaker parking was available near the clubhouse. Martha was invited to speak at a subcommittee meeting. Though she was nervous, she shared her story eloquently. How terrifying it felt to have personal, irreplaceable belongings thrown away, and how heartened she was to see the community's response. Her testimony resonated with many who had experienced lesser but still hurtful run-ins with Karen. Stories emerged of petty citations for porch plants or demands to remove small decorative flags supporting causes dear to residents. The seniors realized that individually, they were vulnerable, but collectively, they wielded significant influence within Golden Oaks Park. Word of the Lockable Compartment project continued to spread. Some folks tinkered further, adding small LED lights to help seniors see at night or attaching phone holders so they could call for assistance if needed. The local philanthropic group pitched in with donations to cover costs for residents on fixed incomes. A retired schoolteacher named Rosalie formed a small volunteer group to coordinate requests. If a senior needed a lockable basket, they'd contact Rosalie, who would then schedule an installation day with Frank or another volunteer. The sense of collective purpose grew. Street by street, the vibe of Golden Oaks Park lifted. Neighbors who had felt anxious or reclusive under Karen's watchful eye now found common ground in helping their elderly friends. At one point, the reclamation crew even joked that Karen's cruelty had unintentionally sparked the greatest wave of community spirit in Golden Oaks Park's history. Karen's arrogance took a hit with each passing week. She couldn't issue fines at will anymore, as the board had effectively neutralized her ability to do so without oversight. She still attended board meetings, but found herself drowned out by calls for constructive neighborhood improvements. Embarrassed by the glare of publicity, Karen started to avoid the clubhouse at busy times. Yet one afternoon, she crossed paths with Martha, who was sitting on a bench by the koi pond, crocheting a baby blanket. Their eyes met. Martha gave a polite nod. She refused to show animosity, even after everything. Something about that gentle gesture made Karen pause. After a long silence, Karen mumbled an awkward apology. "I didn't realize. I shouldn't have." Her words trailed off, heavy with unspoken guilt or perhaps just embarrassment at being caught and publicly censured. Martha considered Karen. "It hurt," she admitted, "more than I can say. It wasn't just my belongings in that basket, it was my independence." Karen listened, arms folded tightly. There was a moment when it seemed she might open up or at least acknowledge the harm she'd caused. But pride or fear won out. She nodded curtly, mumbled, "I see," and left. Martha sighed, but part of her was relieved that at least Karen was forced to face her. Despite the wave of positivity in the neighborhood, Karen remained a thorn. Martha's children pressed on with their threat of legal action, pushing the HOA to hold Karen accountable. They contacted an attorney, who drafted a letter to the HOA board demanding a formal apology and restitution for Martha's ruined property. Facing potential legal costs and negative publicity, Howard Mitchell convened yet another emergency session. "We either settle this amicably or we risk a lawsuit," he warned. The board debated how to handle it. Some believed Karen should pay Martha's damages out of her own pocket. Others felt that the HOA, as Karen's employer in an official capacity, should assume responsibility. Karen seethed, calling it an overreaction. But the reality was that the HOA's insurance might not cover intentional acts of property destruction. Karen might be personally on the hook. A settlement was eventually reached where Karen was required to pay a modest sum to cover Martha's medication replacements, new yarn, and the cost of a replacement walker basket. The letter included a formal censure of Karen's behavior. Although the settlement remained mostly private, the gist of it spread through the community, further eroding Karen's standing. Shortly after settling, Karen began missing meetings. The board discovered that she was putting her house up for sale. Rumors abounded that she planned to move to a more upscale neighborhood where she could assume an even stricter HOA role. Others suggested she simply wanted a fresh start, somewhere her reputation wasn't tarnished. A for sale sign sprouted in her yard one Sunday afternoon, confirming the whispers. Meanwhile, Golden Oaks Park thrived in her partial absence. The reclamation crew, the seniors subcommittee, and other enthusiastic volunteers started new projects, community gardens, a refurbished playground, and better signage for older pedestrians crossing the streets. Freed from Karen's constant negativity, the neighborhood flourished in creativity and camaraderie. Even the board's monthly reports had a more constructive tone. No more pages of petty citations, no more official condemnation of kids' lemonade stands or front porch decor. On a crisp autumn morning, a moving truck rolled onto Karen's driveway. She supervised the packing, her posture rigid, eyes scanning for any last-minute violations she could note. But the neighborhood carried on peacefully. The truck was loaded. Karen locked the door to her house for the final time and stalked off without a single goodbye to those who lingered on the sidewalk, curious to witness her departure. Only Martha, from her window, gave a gentle wave when she saw Karen climb into her car. Karen hesitated a moment, eyes flicking over to where Martha's walker stood, complete with its lockable compartment. No smile crossed Karen's face, but she gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the entire ordeal, and then drove away. The oppressive chapter of her presence in Golden Oaks Park came to an end. News spread quickly. Karen had officially moved out. A collective sigh of relief swept the community. Even those who had never had a direct conflict with her felt the air lighten. To celebrate, neighbors organized a potluck dinner at the clubhouse, a tradition that had all but disappeared under Karen's reign. Tables laden with homemade casseroles, salads, pies, and cookies lined the hall. Families, seniors, teens, and even dogs on leashes mingled in the bright afternoon sun. Speeches were made. People laughed and danced. Martha, seated comfortably in a corner, crocheted while chatting with a circle of neighbors who adored her good humor and determination. The mood was jubilant, as though a cloud had been lifted. During the potluck, Howard Mitchell took the podium. "Before we fill our plates a second time," he said, "I want to acknowledge the extraordinary efforts by so many volunteers who joined the Lockable Walker Compartment initiative. You've not only made life easier for our seniors, you've enriched us all by reminding us what a real community can do when we look out for each other." He singled out Frank, Rosalie, and the reclamation crew for their unrelenting dedication. Then he introduced Martha, who sat blushing at the attention. "We owe Martha a debt of thanks," Howard continued, "for enduring a painful incident with grace and for allowing it to spark something good, an innovation that will continue helping our residents for years to come." The crowd erupted in applause. Martha waved shyly. A few tears glistened in her eyes. Despite the sad memory of having her belongings dumped in the trash, this moment felt like a triumph of compassion over pettiness. With Karen gone, the HOA board restructured its leadership. New elections were held, and more community-minded individuals stepped forward. Howard Mitchell, though aging, decided to stay on for one more term, mentoring younger members to ensure that the spirit of unity lasted. Bylaws were reviewed carefully, with the board proposing amendments that encouraged neighbors to help each other maintain their properties rather than slapping them with fines. The emphasis shifted to proactive assistance. If someone's lawn was overgrown, the board suggested volunteer mowers or organized a weekend cleanup event. The seniors subcommittee was officially recognized as an advisory group, granting older residents a direct voice in planning and policy. The crocheting circle received a small budget from the HOA to purchase yarn for charitable projects, which they repurposed into a fundraiser for a local senior center. A new dawn indeed. Though Karen was no longer around, her legacy served as a cautionary tale. At times, strict rules can be necessary to maintain a safe, clean environment, but the moment they become weapons in the hands of the narrow-minded, they do more harm than good. Her attempt to rid the neighborhood of clutter had, ironically, inspired a revolutionary approach to protecting the personal property of seniors. The story of the Lockable Walker Compartments spread beyond Golden Oaks Park. Other neighborhoods copied the idea, leading to widespread adoption of similar designs. This broader acceptance of the idea filled the residents of Golden Oaks Park with pride. They'd not only reclaimed their community from a domineering individual but also proven that adversity can lead to meaningful change. The newfound unity manifested in everyday acts of kindness. Teenagers walked neighbors' dogs, seniors taught younger folks how to knit or cook traditional dishes, and families organized block parties every summer, a grand celebration that spanned multiple streets. For the first time in years, people felt safe to be themselves. No fear of unsolicited photos taken by Karen, no dread of receiving a nasty letter taped to the front door. Martha's crocheting group saw an influx of new members. Together, they sewed blankets, hats, and mittens for children's hospitals, homeless shelters, and animal rescues. They held silent auctions for these items, raising funds to buy more walker compartments for low-income seniors outside Golden Oaks Park. A sense of extended community took root, forging relationships beyond the neighborhood's borders. In the spirit of paying it forward, Martha wanted to do something special for the reclamation crew. At a monthly crocheting group, she unveiled a massive quilt, its squares adorned with embroidered images representing various acts of kindness, someone mowing a lawn, another installing a lockable basket, a child helping a senior cross the street. In the center was a small embroidered cameo of Martha's walker, complete with a tiny metallic clasp to represent the lock. The words, "We stand together," were stitched in flowing script across the top. Everyone who saw the quilt was moved to tears. It was more than a piece of art. It was a tribute to a community that had, despite serious divisions, found its way back to unity. The quilt was temporarily displayed in the clubhouse, becoming a conversation starter for all who visited. As the months went by, the Lockable Compartment initiative continued strong. Most seniors who needed walkers, wheelchairs, or canes now had some form of secure storage. Even those who didn't absolutely need it appreciated the peace of mind. Incidents of theft or property tampering were virtually non-existent, and a volunteer-run Neighborhood Watch was established, not for petty rule enforcement, but to ensure the safety of each resident. During holiday seasons, the community watch would gather small gifts, baked goods, or crocheted scarves, and distribute them to every senior household. Dusk would see neighbors walking each other's dogs or chatting under the newly installed streetlights. Golden Oaks Park was at last living up to its name, a place of warmth and solidarity. Martha, her spirits lifted by the positive changes, traveled for the first time in years to visit her grandchildren on the West Coast. It thrilled her to know she could leave her home for extended periods without fear of petty vengeance from Karen. Meanwhile, families who had once considered moving out due to the stifling atmosphere decided to stay. Property values even rose, ironically fulfilling one of Karen's stated goals, though not for the reasons she had espoused. In the evenings, one could stroll through the park-like streets and see small gatherings on front porches, hear the hum of friendly chatter. The oppressive hush that had once blanketed the neighborhood was replaced by the murmur of conversation, the sweet strains of a guitar now and then, or the delighted laughter of kids playing a game. More people joined committees, contributed ideas, and participated in neighborhood events. The question was no longer, what can't we do? But what can we do next? Eventually, some residents heard a rumor of where Karen had landed. She joined a new HOA in another state. There, so the story went, she was embroiled in disputes over fence heights and unapproved door hangings, not unlike her old patterns. It seemed she hadn't learned much from Golden Oaks Park. But that was no longer anyone's concern. The neighborhood's focus had turned to building each other up, not tearing each other down. For Golden Oaks Park, Karen became a footnote in the community's history, a cautionary example of how not to govern, how not to treat neighbors, and how a single voice of negativity can wreak havoc if left unchecked. But her misguided attempt to tidy up a senior's walker unexpectedly sparked one of the most unifying ventures the neighborhood had ever seen. The story of Karen and Martha could have been just another suburban tragedy, a power-hungry HOA member against a kind but vulnerable senior. However, it became the catalyst for a renaissance in community spirit. Volunteers rallied, the board corrected course, and seniors received the support and dignity they deserved. In the end, Golden Oaks Park emerged stronger, kinder, and more cohesive than ever before. Where once the fences dividing yards felt like barriers, they now stood as mere boundaries between friends. Newcomers to the neighborhood were greeted with baskets of homemade cookies and cheerful hellos. The crocheting group's membership soared, and the clubhouse bustled with activities for people of all ages. And on any given morning, if you wandered past Martha Henderson's cozy home, you would find her on the porch, crocheting a new baby blanket or reading a novel, her walker beside her. The lockable compartment gleamed in the sunlight, a shining reminder of what a neighborhood can do when it stands together. A neighbor might pause to chat or offer a wave, and Martha would smile, content in the knowledge that here, in Golden Oaks Park, compassion had triumphed over callousness. A final testament to that transformation lay in the fact that the words, "We stand together," once stitched onto a commemorative quilt, now seemed to float above the entire neighborhood in spirit. Each day was a fresh reminder of a lesson well learned. Good neighbors don't just follow rules, they support each other, turning even the darkest moments into opportunities for unity and love.